1, 2. And so we're going to review the sets of numbers. And once again, this should be review. You should already know these. So it's something that shouldn't take that much time to go through. First of all, we have the natural numbers. Those were the first numbers that you learned. That's the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Those are symbolized with the letter N. You have the whole numbers, which are 0, 1, 2, and 3, and so on. And that's symbolized with the letter W. You have the integers, which are now the negatives, and those are symbolized with a Z. And then you have the rationals, which are fractions terminating and repeating decimals. Those are symbolized by the letter Q. And then the irrationals are the non-terminating or non-repeating decimals. And the irrationals are symbolized with the letter I. Okay, now every number is called a real number. And a real number is symbolized with an R with 2 lines. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're just going to classify numbers. And like I said, you've already done this. We did this in Algebra 1. You did this when you were in middle school. So this should be review. This is not new information. Okay, so if you didn't get those quite written down, you can go ahead and turn in your book to section 1, 2, but we're moving on to the next page. Okay, name the sets of numbers to which each number belongs. So the very first thing, we start with the number -23. Is that a natural number? No. Is it a whole number? Is it an integer? Yes. Is it a rational? If it's an integer, it's got to be a rational. Yep. Okay. So, if it's an integer, it's got to be rational. So now we start with 50. Is that a natural number? Whole. What? No. Integer. Rational. So then it is an irrational. -4/9, is that a natural? Whole. Integer. Nope. Rational. Yes, because it is a fraction. All right, so that's what you're going to have to do. First part of your homework. Pretty straightforward. Okay, the next part, these are properties, and these are taken from your book as well. This is on page 12. So if you want to follow along there, we're just going to review these properties. Okay, it says for any real numbers A, B, and C, the first property is known as the commutative property. Now, when you think of commutative, what's the root word? Commute. So that's like you go from home to school every day, right? A lot of you drive, and then you do school to home. So that's what we have two numbers here. Home to school equals school to home. So that's your trip. So when we think about commutative, we think about the commute we make every day from our home to our school, and then at the end of the day from school to home. Commutative, 2. Also works for multiplication. Associative deals with 3 and associating in groups. Best way to think about associative, okay, is like a breakup. You have a couple here, got the best friend. Best friend swoops in, steals the boyfriend, and this one's now left out. Okay? So how do you associate? Okay? Associative, group of 3. All right? Think of the big breakup. Works in both multiplication and addition. All right, identity property. That just says if you add 0, you get the number itself. If you multiply by 1, you get the number itself. Inverse, that's when you add the negative or you add or put the reciprocal in. And then closure just basically states you're going to get numbers, and then you've got your distributive property. So once again, what I would do, even if you had like a little sticky note or whatever, you're going to be using page 12 quite a bit. Okay, and so it's going to be one of those things. Mainly the properties you're going to need to know are commutative, which you guys probably could remember, associative, which you could remember, identity, and inverse. And then most of you know distributive. So, I mean, those are, for the most part, not too bad. So let's go ahead and look at an example of those. Name the property illustrated by. Okay, so you've got your expressions right now. I want you to go ahead and type in. What property is illustrated by that? Commutative, associative, distributive, or inverse? A, B, C, or D? Okay. hold on, I've got a hub here. B, good. It's associative. This is the breakup. Okay, best friend swooping in and stealing the boyfriend. Or stealing the girlfriend, it could be. Okay, so anyway, it doesn't always have to be the girl that's the bad person. Yeah, I know. Doesn't matter. That was the point. All right, so now we go. Here we go. 2 times 6x plus 9 equals 12x plus 18. What property is that going to be? Okay, let's go. Answer is distributive property. Now this is one of those that what you could have done is you could have looked at it and said, is this the commutative property? No. This isn't home to school, school to home. Is this the associative where the best friend steals the boyfriend? No. Okay, so that leaves you with distributive and inverse. And so when you look at those, is that distributive or the inverse? That's got to be the distributive property because you've distributed the two. So that's just one of those test-taking techniques when you get like to the ACT. You're going to want to eliminate those that like make no sense, that you know are wrong right away. Okay, find the additive inverse and the multiplicative inverse. We've got 1.25. First of all, the additive inverse. That's the number that you add to 1.25 to get 0. What's your additive inverse on that? Negative 1.25. So basically, to find the additive inverse, you're finding the opposite. That's it. Pretty straightforward. Okay, the multiplicative inverse, on the other hand, okay, that's the number that you take times 1.25 to make it equal 1. So the best way to do this, when you're finding multiplicative inverse, you've got to write that as a fraction. What is 1.25 as a fraction? 1 1/4 or 5 over 4. The multiplicative inverse is going to be the flip of that. So what's the multiplicative inverse going to be? 4/5. Pretty straightforward.
What does multiply whatever inverse mean?
It's just the number that when you take it times the number, it gives you 1. Okay, let's look at another one. Find the additive inverse and the multiplicative inverse. What's the additive inverse? 5/8. What's the multiplicative inverse? Negative 8/5. Okay? You got to keep the negative sign because it's just the flip. Because if you take negative 5/8, take that times negative 8/5, you get the number 1. All right, let's look at the next one. Find the additive inverse and the multiplicative inverse. Ooh, good one. What's your additive inverse? Negative square root 7. What's the multiplicative inverse?
Square root of
1 over root 7, right? But there's one of my rules. I don't let you ever have square roots in the denominator. It's bad. Okay? So we've got to get rid of that square root. So this is what you're going to do. Whatever the square root is on the bottom, you're going to multiply both the top and the bottom by that number. Okay? On the top, what do you get? Root 7. On the bottom, this is the trick. What ends up happening is those are going to cancel each other out, and you're going to be left with the number 7. It's actually root 49. Square root of 49 is 7. So for those of you that were kind of given it look like, huh? So if you had something like this, 1 over root 5, what are you going to multiply by? Root 5 over root 5. So your answer is root 5 over 5. Okay. So far, so good? Should be pretty straightforward. Okay, find the additive inverse, multiplicative inverse. Again, what's the additive inverse? Negative 2.5. Multiplicative inverse. 2/5, good. For those of you wondering where that came from, this is actually the number 5/2 as an improper. So you flip it. Okay, last thing, we're going to look at some story problems. It says the prices of computers are components of a computer package offered by Computer Depot are shown in the table. If a 6% sales tax is added to the purchase price, how much sales tax is charged for this computer package? What do you do? Add them all together, and then I'm going to show you a little trick that'll even work better than that. Add them together, what do you get? So 359.95 plus 219.99. What'd you say? So now, normally, you would take it times 6% and then add that and all that. I'm going to show you a little trick. Take it times 1.06 and tell me what you get. $961.87? 89. That's your final purchase price. Instead of taking it times 0.06 and then putting that number here and then adding the two together, by multiplying it by 1.06, you're already doing that as a combined step. Okay? So that's a little trick. If you don't like that, that's fine. Multiply by 0.06 and then add them together. But this is a way that'll give you the answer directly. And so that's one of those things. If your sales tax is like 7%, you multiply it by 1.07. If it's 5.5%, you would multiply it by 1.055. This one accounts for the purchase price, and that's what puts the 907 in there and then adds the sales tax to it. All right, last thing, simplify. What do you do here? Distribute. So if I distribute, what do I get? Minus, you gotta make sure that's the negative. Like terms, what do you get? 6m minus 8n. Okay, so that's the last part of your homework. Pretty straightforward. All right, this is what you need to do. I'm gonna go ahead and pass back your quiz, or pass out your quizzes. Those will be done by the end of the period. Remember on your quiz, you can use all of your notes. Okay. Make sure you keep your eyes on your own paper.